In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, and prayers and peace upon the Prophet Muhammad and upon all the prophets of God. First, before I start, I'd just like to thank the people that worked very hard to do all of this that you're seeing here today, the effort. There's a lot of people behind this effort, and sometimes they're forgotten in the actual spectacle of events. The people that come before everything and set up everything, and the people that go out of their way to do things like this, to put flowers there, which is always a feminine touch. So I'd like to thank Khadija O'Connell, who did, and I hope everybody, inshallah, make a prayer for her and her family and her husband, who happens to be on Hajj right now, and she stayed behind to hold down the fort. That's why they say behind every great man is a great woman, and behind every great woman is herself. And also for the volunteers here at Zaytuna, and all of the guests, and Imam Zaid also, who took time from his community because he has a thriving community on the East Coast, and he took time from his community to come out and spend some time with us on the Eid. This program, it was Ramis who was introducing us, who had this idea of using this occasion, and he mentioned the reasons for that, as a way of celebrating the days of Eid and the Hajj, and also celebrating Malcolm, or Malik Shabazz. And I think that it's appropriate and fitting that we celebrate the life of Malcolm and not the death of Malcolm on the approximate anniversary of his death, because it's actually his life that I think brings so many interesting aspects to the American Muslim phenomenon. Imam Malik Shabazz was once asked why he became Muslim, and he said, and when I read this quote I was very struck by it, he said that my people came from Africa, and he said if we were always told that they were ignorant people there, but if you go back you'll find that many of the people that came here were Muslims. Their religion was Islam, and they had great civilizations in Africa. And Malcolm said that in the early 60s, when there was actually almost no work had been done on the Muslim presence in this country, over 500 years, and there's actually some research that indicates that there was pre-Columbian Islamic presence. It's not as solid, but it's an area of research. It's not as solid as the research that has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that large segments of African Muslims were brought here as slaves, and they set up Quran schools, and they attempted to maintain their religion in spite of a society that was stripping them not only of their religion but of their dignity, of their clothes, of everything. I actually met an African American woman who wore a hijab, and I said, "Are you Muslim?" She said, "No." And I asked her why she was wearing a hijab. She said, "Because when my ancestors were brought here, they were stripped of their clothes. So I just want to wear the clothes like the Muslims have, so that nobody can strip me of my clothes." And so these people that came here and lived as Muslims in this land despite all these odds, and I recommend all of you to read a book by Sylvian Diouf called The Servants of Allah. And it's a beautiful book, which was a result of Alan Austin's research, a very wonderful professor who we brought here for the Forgotten Roots Conference. He did the research. Now I want to show you the impact of a man's life. Because in a sense you can't measure a man's life or a woman's life by the appearances of their life. There's elements in a biography that will never emerge in a book, the biography of a person. And if you look at Malcolm's life, one of the important touchstones for me growing up was a television series called Roots, which occurred in the 70s. And people don't know that was because of Malcolm. That he said when he told Alex Haley, you know, that we were Muslims. And Alex Haley took that seriously, and he started researching and found out it was true. Well, Michener, who wrote Hawaii and other books, he read the work of Alex Haley and said, that's a load of rubbish. And he wrote an article in the Reader's Digest saying that that's just fantasy. That's Malcolm X's fantasy. There weren't any Muslims here. Well, Alan Austin read that article. And Alan Austin spent the next several years of his life writing an 800-page academic documentation of the presence of several million Muslims in this country. I mean, this is something phenomenal if you think of that. That's all from this one man. And if you look, like Imam Zayd pointed out, his mother, his father, his environment, all of those extraordinary elements that came together to make that man. And I just, last week, I was with his daughter, Atayla Shabazz. And one of the things that she said about Malcolm, she said, we saw a side of him in the home that a lot of people did not ever see. She said he was a gentle soul in the house. And he didn't teach us anything that would inculcate anger or hatred in our hearts. She said he never taught anything like that to his children. And so when you look at him and his transformation, the power to me in Malcolm is that, rahimahullah, is that he was on a spiritual path from day one. And he was evolving. And he was somebody who was big enough to jettison whatever he was carrying when he recognized it was no longer necessary to carry it. Everything in his life, as far as I'm concerned, was a necessary event. Because a man's life is the aggregate of the moments that make up his life. The fact that he became a criminal was necessary to understand something about the conditions of oppressed people and the alternatives that oppressed people have. And if you look at Ibn Khaldun, one of the great thinkers and sociologists of human history, he is a human figure. He is not the property of Muslims. In the book by Mark Van Doren, or Charles Van Doren, his son, called The History of Knowledge, one of the acknowledgments he gives in that book, in the section on acknowledgement, was to Ibn Khaldun. Toynbee, who wrote a book called Toynbee's History, which is over 10 volumes. The most influential historian on his life was Ibn Khaldun. So people read Toynbee's history and they don't realize they're influenced by a 9th century Moroccan, Tunisian, Andalusian scholar. So all of these extraordinary influences that are out there, and so many of these influences came together in his life, this man, Malik Shabazz. Entering into the nation of Islam was necessary phase for him because he had to break something in himself. And what he was breaking was what Ibn Khaldun says happens to oppressed people, which is indolence, which is trickery, which is attempts to escape responsibility, because that has been removed from them. Like Imam Zayd said, if somebody's always, every time you get into the race, there's a foot there to trip you, it's very difficult to stay in the race. And when the other ones are so far ahead of you, you can lose hope and just give up and not want to run anymore. So he had to understand all of those things, and that's why as he emerged out of that, he was able to address all of those things that he had experienced with a type of sincerity and legitimacy that you don't find in a theoretician. I can write a book of theory about how to solve the problems of drug addiction, but a drug addict who's been through it, had the monkey on his back, come out of it, can write a much more valid book. And that's why Askia Muhammad, who was in the advisory group of people that advised the state of California, he had come through it. He wasn't theoretical in his approach to that problem. And that's so Malcolm, the problems that he addressed were not theoretical problems. They were real problems that he lived. And that's why the culmination of his life in the Hajj and the events, and if you have not listened to his talks, it's a good thing to do. And I'll tell you something that I've always noted about his talks that occur after Mecca is when anger is removed from the heart, it's very difficult to speak in a certain way that he was able to speak prior to Mecca. And you can see it's as if he himself is trying to find his voice. And he was, because of his inherent brilliance and his natural ability to reason, because he always sets up arguments. Whenever you listen to he's always got an argument, and he hits on these points, and he gets to the point where it's almost irrefutable. The only thing that could stop an intellect like that is a bullet. And that's why the worst types of people are people that want to snuff out truth with violence, because they know that they cannot snuff out truth with falsehood. They can't do it. You see, they can't sit on the same. And this is why there are people in this country that are never allowed into these panels with these pundits that tell you what's wrong with the country. There are certain people that are not allowed to sit on those panels, because if they start speaking, suddenly people are going to notice that these other characters over here, they don't make any sense. In fact, they're using sophistical reasoning. And they don't teach logic in school anymore. They don't teach it because they don't want people to be able to see through sophistical arguments. That's why they don't teach it. That's why logic was part of every single traditional curriculum in school, was to teach people how to think, how to reason. And one of the chapters in every text of logic is, in Arabic they call it al-mughalatat, sophistical reasoning. You learn how to see sophistical argumentation. You learn how to see flaws in reasoning, like an ad hominem attack. Because if somebody's speaking the truth and then a man wants to refute him, he says, hey, this guy beats his wife. And then suddenly we've gone from an intellectual argument to an ad hominem attack. And now everybody's looking at him like a wife beater. It's a little hard to hear what he was talking about before that. And it's a very common way of attacking, and it occurs all the time. Politicians now use this method. So when you see a commercial of one politician, what he spends his time doing is attacking the other. He's not offering you, what are you going to do? He's just telling you how bad this guy is, because it starts making him look a little good in light of how bad he is. The problem is the other one uses the same ad company that produced the commercials, and they can do as good a job as the other one, and so everybody's left just wondering. It's like these pamphlets they hand out to you at the voting booth, and if you read the pro, you're going to vote for it, but then you read the con, you decide to vote against it, and it just depends on which one you read last. Because they have lawyers that are trained in very clever techniques of sophistry. And that's why, in the end of the day, Socrates, they had to condemn him to death. Because you can't have those characters walking around. They're dangerous people. Really, they're dangerous people. People that actually can think and reason and speak the truth are dangerous people to have around. For the people that have something to lose when the truth is heard. And that's why Malcolm, one of the things that he said, he talked about Islam being a religion that wants fairness. And he said, and the only people that don't like that type of religion are wolves that prey on sheep. Because when somebody's making his living off exploiting others, and then you introduce something that's going to remove that ability of exploitation, he feels a vested interest being threatened. And if it gets too serious, depending on how powerful he is, he might move to try to eliminate that threat to his vested interest, which occurred in Mecca when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ began to preach about the unity of God, and suddenly all these Meccans are thinking, wait a second, our business is based on the fact we have 360 idols in the Kaaba, and the reason all these Arabs come and visit Mecca every year is because their idols are here, and that's how we make our money. The polytheists were very ecumenical. Anybody could bring their idol to Mecca and put it there. They didn't have a problem with that. But if you say there's only one God and therefore remove all those idols, they had a problem with that. Because suddenly they had these vested interests that were being threatened. Also their traditions, because it was based on the idea that their fathers were these great men, and the idea of saying that our fathers were fools to be worshiping stones, they viewed that as a threat also to their lineage. Because I'm proud because my father was so-and-so, and now you're telling me my father was a fool? It becomes a little upsetting. So all these vested interests. And then another problem. The Prophet ﷺ was an aristocrat. He wasn't one of the oppressed rising up with the banner of down with the aristocrats. He was one of their own. He was the son of Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib was one of the greatest notables of Mecca. He was the lord of Quraysh. And this is his son who's saying, you people have gone astray. Now, what I'd like to look at is this idea of what happened in Mecca. And I'll just give you, from my own experience of going to Mecca many, many times and making the pilgrimage more than once. I remember on my first pilgrimage, and one of the things that Malik Shabazz said in his autobiography about the pilgrimage was he said he learned at Mecca that all humanity snores in the same language. And that's a message to learn in Hajj, that we share these very similar characteristics. And you look at people on Hajj and you see all of these, you see short people, fat people, skinny people, tall people, beautiful people, ugly people, people with diseases, people in full health, young people, middle-aged people, old people, men, women, every color. Every possible type of human that you could imagine, and even some that you couldn't even imagine, you see on Hajj. And this idea that everybody's the same for those few days that you spend in Hajj, they're all stripped of their rings and if they have a watch, if it's a Rolex or a Timex, it's stripped. And then you can't come in with your Lexus and think that everybody's going to move out of your way. Because even the princes, when they come in, they end up being in traffic jams just like everybody else. So there's this equalizing event that occurs. And the message of that, because what Mecca is about, what the Hajj is about the Day of Judgment, is about preparation for the Day of Judgment. And there's a wonderful dialogue that Plato mentions, in which Socrates argues with a man whose basic proposition is that might makes right. That's his argument. And Socrates wants to prove to him that it is better to be oppressed than to oppress. Because if you are oppressed, it's your physical being that gets harmed. But when you oppress, you harm your soul. So that an oppressed person's soul can remain intact, even if their body does not. But an oppressor, his soul is what is destroyed through his oppression. So this is his argument. He attempts to prove to this man, and this man, he's looking purely in these terms, in material terms. He said, that's all fine and dandy, Socrates, to philosophize like that when you're 18 years old, but at your age you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You should have given up those ideas long ago and dealt with the reality of the world. At that point, he realizes in his argument that he can't reason with this person in worldly terms, and he switches the argument. And this is something that Ibrahim a.s. does when he talks to Nimrod. He takes the argument to a higher level. Because Ibrahim a.s. says to Nimrod, he says, when he asks him about Allah, he says, my Lord is the one who gives life and gives death. So this tyrant brings two slaves, kills one, and says, go ahead, you can still live. He said, I can do that. Now Ibrahim could have obviously said, with all due respect, that's a pretty idiotic attempt to explain my meaning. What I meant was God is the originator of life and he's the taker of life, and that. But he didn't say that. He could have gone that route. What he did is he took the discourse to a higher level, and he said, that's okay, pretty impressive. My Lord brings the sun from the east, and we watch it go down in the west. Let's see you bring it from the west, and we watch it go down in the east, and the Quran says, فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. Suddenly the one who was in disbelief was bewildered. He was at a loss. He had no argument anymore. So this is what Socrates says to this man is, he says, let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you something that I know is true, but you're going to think it's a myth. When you die, you're going to be raised up. That's what he says in the Platonic dialogue. He says, when you die, you're going to be raised up. And you're going to be brought before a court. And that judge is not susceptible to bribery. You're going to be stripped naked of your clothes. All of those things that can influence a judge in this world, when you walk into the courtroom with your three-piece tailor-made suit, looking at your Rolex or your Cartier watch, with your dream team behind you. That's pretty impressive. If I'm a judge, I'm going to be impressed. He said, none of that's going to help you. This judge isn't susceptible to those type of trappings. And you might be able to box my ears off in this world, but if you continue on your way, you're going to get your ears boxed off in the next world. My commitment is to live the best ethical life that I can as long as I'm in this world, so that I'm saved in that court of law in the next world. And that's what I suggest you do. That's the message of Hajj. You look at all those people, rich, poor, destitute, male, female, old, young, they're all there for one reason. Ideally. And that is to say one thing. Forgive us. Allahumma innaka afu tuhibbul afu fa'fu anna. Oh Allah, you are the pardoner. You love to pardon. It's in your nature as a divine reality. So pardon me. And the message that you suddenly realize is, looking around, everybody's doing the same thing. We're all in the same boat here. And there's people crying on Arafat with tears, and some of them are shouting. And you're looking around, they're all asking the same thing, and then you start thinking, if that's what he wants the same thing I want. And you realize you're looking at 3 million people that represent the entire human family, and they all have one common desire: to be freed of the mud of their existence, to get out of that earthy nature that keeps pulling us down, to rise to something higher. And that's what he saw. And that's why when he came back to this country, he was able to do that. Because the challenge of Malcolm is that a man from a good family reduced to a petty criminal who rises above that to become a racist that attacks the system that he believed forced him into the life that brought him to the lowest of the low. And then he goes and sees another way out, which is that I don't have to go that route. There's another way. It's to realize that that one oppressing is in worse shape and in more need of the one being oppressed. And if you can't see that, you're blind. If you can't see that, you're blind. That's the message. That's what he came to say. That these people need help. And it's very, very easy to have sympathy for the oppressed. But it's very, very difficult to have sympathy for the oppressor. That's what Dostoevsky says when Jesus says, love your enemies. That's the challenge. It's not loving those who are good to you. Anybody can do that. It's actually having some sympathy for people that you're enemies. And that's why the Quran says, عَسَى اللَّهُ أَنْ يَجْعَلْ بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ الَّذِينَ عَدَيْتُم مِّنْهُم مَوَدَّةً. Perhaps God will put between those who you are now in animosity with, who will put love between you. وَاللَّهُ قَدِيرٌ. And Allah is capable of doing that. Wallahu ghafur rahim. And Allah is the forgiving, the merciful. So will you be forgiving and merciful? If you want God's mercy, are you willing to extend it to your fellow man? That's the challenge. And there's only one element of people that are removed from that in the Quran. And these are the mockers, the mustahzi'un. This is the only element. These are the ones who mock people, who make fun of other people, who laugh at the tribulations of others, who derive pleasure in these things. Those are the ones that the Quran, it's كَفَيْنَاكَ الْمُسْتَهْزِئِينَ. We'll take care of these people. Don't worry about them. You see, that's the reality. That's what the Quran message is. Don't worry about all these things. Do what you have to do within the constraints of dignified behavior and with your humanity intact, because don't let your enemy take your humanity from you. So Malcolm's challenge is, can you rise above? Can you transcend the incidentals of difference to achieve the unity of the essentials? Can you do that? Are you able to rise above the incidentals of color, of sex, of wealth, to understand that despite our colors, we're human beings, we're the same. Despite our sexes, we're the same. A man and a woman are the same. That's what the Quran says. That's what the Hadith says. An-nisa shaqa'iqur rijal. Women are the other half of humanity. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Can you transcend that? Can you transcend the incidentals of wealth to recognize that some people have wealth from their families, other people don't? Doesn't mean one's better than the other. Are you willing to acknowledge that? It's easier for the poor to do that. It's difficult for the wealthy, because wealthy people like to think they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, but they were born with those bootstraps. If you're poor and you don't have any bootstraps in the first place, how do you pull yourself up by the bootstraps? That's what they say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, man. Well, what if they're not available to you? So how do you do that? You do that, it's all in the Hajj. Because look at the message of the Prophet's Hajj pilgrimage. Look at that message. The first thing, the sanctity of the place, the sanctity of the time. These are sacred days according to the Muslims. This is sacred time we're in. The sanctity of the place, just like a mosque, a church, a synagogue, a temple, there's a sanctity, and that's why these are to be defended in the Quran, because they represent sacred space. So sacred time and sacred space are to be recognized. And then, that all of you are from Adam and Eve. You're one family, all of you. Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, you all came from two people. Inna abakum wahid wa inna ummukum wahida. Kullukum min Adam wa Adam min turab. All of you came from that same soul, and that soul was made from the same earth that all of you were made of. And look what you're made up of, the elements that you're mixed with. Look at what you're composed of. You're composed of water and of earth. That's it. You're mud. That's what we are. We're mud. We're just mud. But within that mud, there's another element. And that element, everybody got it. It doesn't matter who they were. And that's why when that Jew died in Sahih al-Bukhari and that funeral was passing by, the Prophet ﷺ stood up. And his Sahaba, and this is a Sahih hadith in al-Bukhari, his Sahaba said, Yahudi ya Rasulullah, it's a Jew. And what did he say? أَوَلَيْسَتْ nafsa? Isn't it a human soul going back to its Lord? Because in the end of the day, you're all stripped of what those differences were in this world. You're stripped of those things in that essential nature of the soul. And then you're brought back to Allah, and you're judged according to what you knew. Because Allah says, وَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Don't make idols or associates with God knowingly. And that is why the Muslims believe that somebody who does it unwittingly is not taken into account. It's only once it's made clear to them what's right and what's wrong, and that's only done through prophets, messengers that come to explain to human beings. If you don't explain it, Imam al-Ghazali said, even if a distorted version of Islam comes to people and they reject it, they're not taking into account for that rejection. And I told a Mauritanian scholar, if the type of Islam that most Americans have been presented to was presented to me, I would reject it. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? He said, paradise is vast. The Quran says paradise is bigger than the heavens and the earth. There's no population problem. There's no housing problem. Right? The good neighborhoods aren't all taken. You don't have to worry about somebody creeping in. And look what happened to the neighborhood. Right? Because a Buddhist got in there or a Jew got in there. It doesn't work like that. Right? But are people big enough to accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bigger than anything you can imagine? So the Muslims, we're committed to our truth. And we believe it's true, and we believe that it has things to tell about the other traditions that are clarifying. But we're also committed to the belief, according to the Quran, that people have a right to choose for themselves, and according to the Quran, that we're supposed to wait till the next world when God will explain to us about these differences. So you stand committed to your truth. And if somebody else is interested in listening to what you have to say and wants to come on, we call it da'wah. Islam is da'wah. It's an invitation. Welcome. You're welcome to come in. You don't want to come in, you're welcome to stay out, and we can live amicably. We can live in peace. Because our religion tells us that we're Bani Adam. We're children of Adam. It also tells us that all of us are directed towards God, whether we know it or whether we don't know it. We're all directed towards God, towards this reality that brought us into this world. So that's the message. Can we rise above that? And I just want to finish this by saying, Raghib al-Isbahani, he said there's only 4 reasons that people differ concerning beliefs. Those who believe in revelation and those who don't believe in revelation. That's one categorization. And he said those are like people heading in opposite directions. Now the beauty of the earth is you can head in opposite directions, you end up in the same place. You're going to meet them in that same place, and then you can say, hey, I told you. That's Pascal's wager. Right? It's actually Imam Ali's wager, because he said it before Pascal. Imam Ali, a man once said to him, I'm not sure about what you're saying. And he said, well, look at the odds. If I'm right, you're in big trouble. And if I'm wrong, you haven't lost anything other than that you've lived an ethical life. Like the British ethicist said, even if you didn't believe in a day of judgment, you should live your life as if you did. Because that's a worthwhile life, at least in this world. So that's one group. And the beauty of, if they want to go that way, you can say, listen, this is the best way to go. Because this is a land route, that's the ocean, there's sharks, you're going to drown, you're going to get lost, you're going to have problems. But if he wants to go that way, the earth's big enough to let him go that way. Now if he starts taking other people with him intentionally, then you have a problem. So you need to warn people. But for him as an individual to take that route, after you've made it clear to him it's not a good thing to do, let him go. That's what the Quran says, Lakum dinukum waliya din. You have your way, we have our way. And then he said there's a difference about revelation. That's the second group. People that have a different belief about who their prophets were. Now the beauty of, for me, one of the many beauties of Islam is, unfortunately, there are not all Christian, but some Christians in this country. I went to a Christian bookstore, and Islam was under Satanism, which is, it's not a good way to try to create a better world when you think 1/5 of the world's population is worshiping the devil, and you teach that to other people. Because I certainly, if I thought I was worshiping the devil, I wouldn't be in the religion I'm in. We don't believe that. So that's a difference. But the Muslim, we say no. Jesus, we believe in Jesus. We're supposed to say alayhi salam, peace be upon him. We believe in Mary. We believe in the virgin birth. We believe also in a second coming. I mean, all those things, we believe those things. So we believe in the Christian, and then we believe in the Jewish tradition. We believe in Moses. We believe in the Torah. The Quran says, وَأَنزَلْنَا التَّوْرَةَ. You know, we sent down the Torah. فِيهِ هُدًى وَنُورٍ. In it is guidance and light. In it is guidance and light. Now, there's guidance and light in the Old Testament. There's guidance and light in the New Testament. And I want just to, before I'm going to finish this. Last night, my son, in a whispered tone, he had a magazine that has homeschooling things in it. He was looking through it. It's my wife's magazine. But a lot of Christians homeschool. And so they had a section on inspirational crafts. And they had a little church, and it was a poster you could buy for a child's room. And he came up to me and he said, Dad, I read these, and I know there's a cross there, and it's a church, but it's the same as we believe. It's the same thing. They're all true. And so I looked at him and said, words to live by. You should have no other gods but me. That's La ilaha illallah. Put nothing before God. Right? That's what Ibrahim said. Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillah. My prayer, my ritual, my life and my death are all for God. Always use God's name respectfully. The Quran says don't use God's name in vain. Keep God's day special. Right? We believe every day is God's day. I mean, it's not just Sunday, but Jum'ah has a special relationship to us, and these days also. Respect and obey mom and dad. Birr al-walidain. وَوَصَيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. And we told human beings to respect their parents. Do not murder. لَا تَقْتُلُوا نَفْسًا. Quran says don't take a soul without any just right. Do not take another wife or husband. Do not take another's wife or husband. لَا تَزْنُوا. Don't fornicate or commit adultery. Quran. Do not take what belongs to another. Do not tell a lie. Do not want what is not yours. I can't argue with any of that. It's all true. And if it comes from a Christian, it's as true for a Muslim as it is for a Christian or a Jew. And the same thing, I think if a Christian read the Quran with an open heart, he would find, or she would find, that most of what's in the Quran is actually in perfect consistency with their own beliefs and values. And the same for a Jew and even a Buddhist or even many secular humanists, which is what clearly points out that this is for the post-secular West, it's an interesting book for them to consider because it honors science, it honors enlightenment, it honors knowledge. We don't believe in the tree of knowledge being evil. Don't go near the tree of knowledge. No, we believe that the tree of knowledge is what you should pursue and you should eat from its fruit. So the third cause of difference is difference amongst the foundational principles within one religion. So you get Catholic, Protestant, Sunni, Shia. And he says, the difference between Revelations, he said, is like people all headed towards the east. But some of them are headed due east, and other ones are headed southeast or northeast. Those are the different religions. They're all headed towards the same direction. They want salvation, they want truth. But they've gone, some of them have gone different. And he said those who have different usul, he said these are like people traveling in the same direction, but some have gone, they're on the side of the road, and there's thorn bushes, if it's not sound what they're doing. And then the fourth difference are those differences within the rightly guided group. And there's plenty of room, and he said that's like a wide road. The Quran calls Islam the broad road. It's not the straight and narrow, it's the straight and broad. And there's plenty of room for everybody. Muslim, that's the beauty in Islamic society. You're traveling and the Jews on the same road with you. right? Because you believe he's trying to get to God as well. And the Christian and anybody else that believes in God and is trying to please God, and that's why you're supposed to protect their churches, their cities. That's the duty of Muslims, is to protect other people's religions as well, not just Islam. And he says there's plenty of room for that. And just in the end, I want to mention one thing about also Daniel Pearl. And I would like all of you just know that Allah can heal the heart of his wife and his family. And the interesting thing is that after 9/11, when they interviewed a lot of these people who lost their family members, they weren't saying what a lot of people in America were saying, let's go nuke them all. They were saying, a lot of them actually came out opposed to the bombing of Afghanistan. That wasn't reported widely in the news because these are people who, they lost their relatives to the same type of indiscriminate violence. Because anybody that understands the nature of collateral damage, Timothy McVeigh called the people who died in the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma collateral damage. That was the word that he used, and he was taught that word when he was in the army. That's what he called them, collateral damage. And innocent people dying, I don't know how you call that collateral damage. It's whoever thought of that word is collaterally damaged. They used to call this, in this country in World War I and II, it was called the Department of War. But when they'd go around making speeches, we need more money for war. It just didn't ring in people's ears. So they said, let's call it the Department of Defense. Nobody can, even pacifists would agree that you should defend yourself. So this is called euphemisms. He kicked the bucket. So there's a lot to do, and I think we should be committed to trying to spread peace. The Prophet ﷺ said, Afshu salam, spread peace. The Prophet taught us every single prayer 5 times a day. He used to say after the prayer, Allahumma anta salam. Oh Allah, you are peace. Wa minka salam. And to you peace returns. And from you comes peace. Wa ilayka ta'uda salam. And to you returns peace. Fa'ahyina bis salam. Cause us to live in peace. How can you say that Islam is a warmongering religion when that's the prayer of Muslims 5 times a day? And the Quran says, if you're fighting non-Muslims, even if you have the upper hand, if they incline towards peace, you incline too. And the only reason in Islam given to wage war, there are only 2 reasons given in the entire Quran to wage war. If your land is taken from you, or if people are trying to stop you from from worshiping your Lord. Physically trying to coerce you into leaving your religion, you're permitted to defend your faith. Those are the only 2 reasons. And the Quran says God does not prohibit you from befriending and showing kindness and sharing in your wealth peoples of other religions who do not fight you in what you believe or chase you out of your homes. And God loves those who are just. And this is the message of Islam. So, just in that spirit, I want to say a prayer. This is called San Francisco, which is the city of St. Francis. And I was in Rome at an ecumenical council with major leaders of the Christian religion and of the Muslim world. And there were 2, one from the community of Imam Warithuddin Muhammad and myself were there as American Muslims, and the Sheikh, the Mufti of Egypt, and some of the leading scholars from Morocco and Saudi Arabia and other places, and Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya was there, and that's how I was invited, was through him. the day, it just so happened that on the day of our convocation, it was their festival of St. Francis of Assisi. And a lot of people don't know this, but the Franciscans actually, it is recorded in their tradition that he ended the Crusades. That's actually the belief of the Franciscan order, that he ended the Crusades against the Muslims. And the reason is because he went to the Pope and asked for a papal dispensation to allow people to make pilgrimage to Assisi, to his church, as opposed to getting their indulgence through crusades. And the Pope permitted that, and St. Francis of Assisi went on a crusade, the last crusade. He went on a crusade and met with the Muslim scholars. And they were amazed at this man, and it's just recorded in Muslim history. And he went back to the leader of the Crusaders and he told them, do not fight these people, because these are people of God. And they didn't listen to him, and they lost. Because you don't want to, if people have some relationship with God, even if they don't have a relationship with God, if you're a Muslim, you don't want to oppress them, because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, fear oppression, because the oppressed, when he invokes anger towards the oppressor, there is no veil between him and his Lord, even if he disbelieves in that Lord. Did you hear that? In other words, according to the Prophet Muhammad, even a man who doesn't believe in God, if he calls out against an oppressor, God will answer that call, because God detests oppression more than he detests a man who rejects the one who created him. So in the spirit of that, I want to look, and this is a message, I think, to people in this country. Because, and this is San Francisco, you know, this is a city of tolerance. Right? I mean, that's why Muslims in this Bay Area, we take for granted that we're in a very tolerant area. We forget that. That this is a place where there actually is a lot of diversity and there's a lot of understanding. But there's other parts of this country that don't have that. But he had a prayer, and his prayer was, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. Where there is darkness, let me sow light. Where there is sadness, let me sow joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love, for it is in giving that we receive, and it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. And I don't think any Muslim would have any problem with that prayer. And I think the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you could find all of those elements in his teaching. So I hope that this country wakes up to the fact that we need to seek to understand more than to be understood, because we've made ourselves loud and clear. I think the world understands America pretty well, but I think America has yet to understand a lot of the world out there. And I think if September 11th should do anything as a way of honoring the dead, that their lives don't go in vain, is that this country needs to seriously think about what it is that drives people. Because when 2 American kids go crazy in a high school and shoot everybody, they send a whole bunch of psychiatrists down there to try to figure out what happened. No linkage? Then why are you sending psychiatrists down there to find out what created those kids? Why are you studying their families? Why are you studying their school? Because you want to understand what went wrong. It's not normal for two 17-year-olds to dress in military fatigues with machine guns and go shoot all of their fellow classmates. And if you think there's anything normal about that, it's just not normal behavior. So if you think it's normal to get into an airplane and fly it into a building with a bunch of innocent civilians in it, I want to understand what was in their minds. What's going on there? I think we should try to understand that. And if there's anything that we can do to prevent other people from doing things like that, then the Arabs, they say, al-wiqaya khayrun min ilaj. Prevention is better than cure. I think we should do what we can to prevent that. And so I think we have a light and an example in American Islam in Malik Shabazz as somebody who changed. He transformed. He was transformed internally, and that in Christianity they call it metanoia, which is the Greek word for repentance, and it means to change your heart. And in Arabic we call it tawbah. The Jews call it teshuvah, and tawbah means to turn the heart back to God. That's all it means, and that's what we have to do, is turn our hearts and be vehicles of peace, because there's too much madness out there. If you want to contribute to it, there's no flags right now to, you want to go out there and join an army that believes in total war. I'd rather, like the Prophet said, in the end of time, he said there would be wars that were so bad. He said, break your sword. It's a Sahih hadith in Tirmidhi. He said, break the sword, break your bow. He said, even if somebody comes in your house to kill you, be like the first son, the best son of Adam, who said, if you raise your hand to kill me, I'm not going to raise my hand to kill you, because I fear Allah, the Lord of the world. Because Muslims don't kill indiscriminately. We don't believe in that. We don't believe in total war. We believe in rules of engagement and fighting under legitimate state authority for reasons, and I gave you the two reasons, and that's it. And there isn't any other third reason, according to Ibn Taymiyyah and all of the Muslim scholars. So I don't know how these people justify it, but I just, what happened to that reporter was a crime against everything that Islam stands for, and those people will be taken into account against an entire religion. They harmed an entire religion. That wasn't an isolated act, a criminal act. That harmed an entire nation, which is Pakistan, because it makes people think, and I know Pakistanis. I've lived a large part of my life with Pakistani people. Right? They're human beings just like everybody else. They're good people. There's the majority of Pakistanis I've ever met. In fact, I can say I haven't ever met a Pakistani I didn't like. I can honestly say that. But that condemned a whole nation in the eyes of a lot of people. It's a crime. And then you have Jaish-e-Mohammed, people going into the Indian parliament and shooting parliamentarians and almost bringing two countries to the verge of a nuclear war. I mean, you can't have people going out taking the law into their own hands, and we've got enough time with the politicians, right, worrying about them creating nuclear catastrophes, let alone loose cannons out there. So it's a time now, I think, it's metanoia. It's time to change heart. This is a time of tawbah, and that's what the message, I think, of Malcolm's Hajj is, that he got the message. It's time to change. And he did it. And he paid the price, and that's why he's a martyr. Because sometimes that's the price of making that change. He was always ready to die for what he believed, but he made a change, and in some ways that change was the catalyst. So may Allah have mercy on his soul, and God bless all of you, and barakallahu fikum, and inshallah Allah make these days of Eid, and days of light, and the moon is all right where it should be. Don't worry about this universe, it's in good hands. What we have to do is align ourselves. That's all it is, just getting our own souls aligned with this perfect order around us. It's all orderly. Don't believe all this chaos theory, that it's just chaos. Now every spring those flowers bloom. I guarantee you, they're working on getting them to bloom in winter, but that's part of the problem too. Just leave it alone. It was perfect the way it was ordered. So just admire the discipline of that beautiful moon there, and that it has a Lord. That's what the Prophet said when he saw the new moon, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said, Allahumma ahilla alayna bil yumni wal iman wal salamati wal islam, Rabbi wa Rabbuk Allah. Oh Allah, cause this new moon to bring in a month of security and faith, of peace and submission. My Lord and your Lord is Allah. The Lord of that moon is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, creator of the heavens and the earth and everything in it. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu Muhammad Rasulullah. I bear witness that there's no God but a one true God. And I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad was a true and faithful messenger who told us that all of the messengers before him were true and faithful, and we believe in all of them. We believe in the Torah, the Gospels, the Injil, and the Psalms, and all the books we don't know about, that Allah didn't mention but told us they were there too. And all those prophets He didn't mention, we believe in all of them, whoever they were. So أقول قولي هذا, saying this, and may Allah forgive me and all of you. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum.